Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about PTSD and militaries. So, as everybody knows, soldiers may, come home physically, but mentally is a whole different story. They might still feel stuck in combat, they might still be reliving the things that they went through, and it can really affect them at home once they return from, the battlefield, once they return from being deployed or wherever they are. And this can affect veterans, families, and communities, and I got this from the BMC Psychiatry 2022 Veteran Plus Family Recovery. So today I will talk to you about how PTSD, and today I will persuade you that PTSD in the military needs more serious attention because it affects veterans' mental health, families, and their return to normal lives. So there are going to be a couple problems that I'm going to go over here, and a few of them are symptoms, the family and work struggles, and other mental health issues that these veterans can have. So, a couple of the symptoms that they can experience when they return home from combat, they can have anxiety, they can have nightmares, they can have flashbacks. That's kind of typical PTSD when they return home and they're reimagining, reliving the things that they went through. They can also have some mental health struggles. They can have depression, anxiety. They can become isolated from their families and friends. And from the Perspectives in Psychiatric Care 2009, PTSD can change veterans' lives and it can change them quite drastically and often in a very negative way, unfortunately. Another problem they can experience is work and family impact. It can impact both of those aspects of their lives quite significantly, can strain their relationships with their families, they can lose friends, they can distance themselves from people they love. They might find it harder to adjust to a normal, working life after service. Also from BMC Psychiatry from 2022, families affected by military PTSD, it can be very hard for those families that have a soldier, a man or a woman, that return home from combat and they're really struggling to return back to a civilian life. And, they can also have a mental health overlap when it comes to their PTSD and then returning back to normal life. And that can manifest in some forms such as OCD, some complex versions of PTSD, and, depression and anxiety as well. And also got this from BMC Psychology from 2025 from PTSD/C, PTSD in veterans. So these problems do not happen randomly. These problems are very predictable, and unfortunately, they happen quite often. They come from trauma, from military culture, and from difficulty returning home, not just on the physical side, especially on the mental side. And that can really take a toll on the soldiers and their families. So, what are some causes? There can be trauma that they've experienced overseas. They can be stigma, something can trigger them, and they can just have a hard time adjusting back into civilian life. So, what can be some of the trauma they've experienced? Combat. They could have gotten hurt overseas, sometimes quite severely. They could have seen death. They could have seen their friend, someone they really cared about, get hurt, get killed overseas, and that can lead to them being really scared. And that fear can manifest in a couple different ways. They can always be on alert. They can always be, looking out and worry that something's going to happen to them the same way it did when they were in combat. And from ProQuest dissertations and theses from 2017, pre-military trauma plus PTSD in female veterans is unfortunately a trend that we're seeing more and more. The other thing that can happen is stigma. They can have a pressure to seem strong, to conform to that military culture. They can have a fear of judgment, which unfortunately can manifest in them waiting too long to get help before something happens, unfortunately. And the other cause is when they return home, they're still in that military survival mindset about they're in combat and they're fighting for their life. And the civilian life where that is not the case feels different, and unfortunately some families just may not know how to help, these young men and women. And since PTSD, affects the veterans and the people around them, with varying degrees, solutions need to focus on help, treatment, and support. So, what are some solutions? Screening. We can catch these problems before they happen. And then once we do find these problems, the veterans can get treatment and they can get support from their families and their communities, the people around them that really care about them and that can help them. Veterans need easier access to care, medical care, mental health care, community support, whether that comes from the VA, whether that comes from the people around them, or normal hospitals. They need to be able to access that easier so they can get the treatment they need. From Military Health 2025, treatment seeking military veterans with PTSD, they often struggle to find the treatment that they really deserve and that would really, really help them as they adjust back into civilian lifestyle. They can find some programs. Maybe it's a residential program, maybe it's an outpatient program. Also from the Journal of Aggression from Maltreatment and Trauma 2024, PTSD treatment programs can be very, very helpful in addressing the problems that veterans face when they return home. Often a lot of these veterans have seen combat and they need help adjusting to the fact that they're back in a civilian life and everything's going to be okay. It's helpful to have a community and support around them to make sure that they can adjust. And they can also get therapy. Therapy can be a very important resource and can be very useful in helping them face some of the things they've experienced and help them adjust. Family support obviously matters a lot. And from Brain and Behavior 2026, therapy reducing PTSD symptoms are often seen with way more frequency than other sources of treatment. Therapy can be very, very valuable for these veterans. And unfortunately, because of the military stigma that I referred to earlier, it can be a resource that some veterans just don't want to or don't know how to reach out to. So, in conclusion, there are a few problems that the veterans experience. They have some symptoms that they experience when they come home, mental health issues. They have family and work struggles and other mental health issues, and PTSD is really the big one. And unfortunately, that can manifest because of trauma or the stigma, military culture, and just adjusting back to the civilian life. But there are a few solutions. They can get support from their family and friends. Resources like therapy can be really helpful. And if they have better access to medical care, that can help them. So the PTSD in the military really needs serious attention because it can affect veterans' mental health, families, and a return back to normal life. And unfortunately, if we don't help these soldiers come back mentally, they're not going to be able to come back fully. Thank you.